The 2024 HR Benchmark Report is in, and today we're talking about performance management. So this is episode number 7 out of 8 in a series where we are unpacking all of our findings from the 2024 HR Benchmark Report. If you haven't followed along thus far, I encourage you to jump back and check out the prior episodes, but this is what we're doing. We asked small businesses, and we had over 1,000 responses, 1,065 responses, 40 questions, 5 questions in each of 8 areas from pre-employment through post-employment. Here they are: recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment. So 5 questions, yes or no each. Do you do this best practice or that best practice? So 40 questions in total. Then we ask one question at the end. What best describes you last year? Was it a fast growth year, a growth year, or was it zero growth? Were you flat or down year over year? And then we correlate the HR best practice questions to revenue growth. So spoiler alert, as you might imagine, performance management ranks really, really high in its correlation to revenue growth, but maybe not quite as high as you might expect. And I think there's some really good reasons why, and that's what we unpack in today's episode. Thanks for joining.
Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vinoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show.
All right, we're talking performance today. So this is number 7 out of 8 in the employee life cycle categories from the HR Benchmark Report. Spoiler alert right off the top. This is, of all 8 categories, this category has the 3rd largest impact. I think before we even jump in, and I think everybody knows my guest, Mary Simmons. Say hi, Mary.
Hey, Mike.
If you were to ask, I think, the average person of all the categories, and I'll just rattle them off: recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment, which would have the largest correlation to revenue growth based on implementing best practices, my gut says most people would say, well, performance, right? You're managing performance. You're improving performance. You're managing out low performance. That would have the highest correlation. But it's number 3. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think this is where we always say this takes HR out of the cost center and into the ROI driver. I just think organizations don't focus enough on it, right? They're like, I hired this person, go do what you got to do, right? So managing performance and continuing to manage performance is really the differentiator here, right? This is where the organization has to say to themselves, what do I want out of this individual? What are our goals? How do I tie every single individual's performance to the ROI of the organization to drive our, success? So I'm surprised as well. I just think organizations aren't focusing enough on performance, and that's what the statistics are showing us.
I almost have 2 conclusions here. On one, I'm not surprised that it's highly impactful, right? So it's number 3 out of the 8. So
right.
It is very impactful. And if I aggregate all of again, there's 5 questions for each of the 8 sections. So 5 questions in performance. I'll rattle them off. Do you reward high performance with recognition and higher pay? Do you regularly communicate expectations for job performance? Do you have a formal job performance review process? Do you conduct 360 reviews with feedback from multiple team members? And do you document performance improvement plans for underperforming employees? 1,065 respondents, 61% of zero growth firms said yes to those 5 questions. So 5 questions of all those folks, 61% said yes. The fast growth firms, 83% said yes. If I look at the smaller firms under 25 employees, it's 51% of zero growth, 80% of fast growth. That's a 28% spread. So it is a really strong correlation.
For sure.
What's just really interesting, the number one was our topic last episode when we talked about this. Retention. Number two is development, and then performance is number three. The conclusion I think I draw is talent wins, right? The more talented, skilled people, and I think about a sports team, and performance management is maybe coaching. It's like coaching matters a whole lot. Clearly, this is number three, but a great coach can't overcome poor talent, right? And so you have to be recruiting the right talent. You have to be developing the right talent. And you have to be retaining that talent. If you can't develop and retain them, those are clearly more important than managing them. But I think, again, this is all hand in glove. These things are all related,
It
right?
is. It is. And I think, listen, you and I for probably the past year to 2 years have been talking about the war for talent. Well, the economy is changing and that's going to shift, right? For sure, I think that's going to be less of an issue. And I think organizations now need to focus on the right person. Mike, even the right person with all the talent in the world has to be developed. We have to think about retention and we have to think about the performance and how
Yes.
we're going to drive and reward that performance. And listen, you know, rewarding performance is different for each individual, different for each job, industry, organization. So finding that special sauce takes a little bit of work. And sometimes organizations are so busy doing their day to day, they can't focus on this section. I can't impress upon everybody how important this is. And it's going to get more important as the economy's changing. Again, I don't think the war for talent is going to be as difficult. I think you're going to find people, but finding the best people is always tough. And then keeping them on their A game is also difficult.
Yeah. Something else I think jumps out when I read those questions for performance. Do you reward high performance with recognition and higher pay? Do you regularly communicate expectations for job performance? You could make a strong case why those two questions belong in the retention category, right? So if we've already acknowledged retention was the five retention questions had the highest correlation to revenue growth. Well, reasonable to think that if you're not compensating and recognizing your highest performers, if you're not setting expectations on job performance to kind of raise the floor, that your best people aren't going to want to stay, right?
Right.
Winners don't want to work around losers. That may be a harsh way of saying it. There's a great Nick Saban quote on this, like people who strive for excellence don't want to work around mediocrity. They want to work around other people who push them, sharpen steel, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so of your best, you still recognize them, whether it's through compensation or trophies and trips or just
Right.
shout outs.
Thank you.
Thank yous, right? So these things are beyond hand in glove. I think you could almost interchange some of these things with retention. So anything else you want to say before we jump into the actual questions themselves?
No, I agree with you. Performance is like a water level, right? So if you have a high performance level, everybody tries to get to that level. If you have a low performance level, right, your water line is low, it dips everybody, even your top performers. So you want to drive performance up and everybody will come up, or most will come up to that level. I agree.
Yeah. You know what? And maybe folks Google it, hop on YouTube. Maybe you're not a Roll Tide fan, so you won't like it. But I remember I've seen this probably 10 times, and I love it. Saban talks about low performers, mediocre performers don't like working with high performers because they're always pushing them, and it's always uncomfortable. It's like, oh, can't you just chill out, right? It's like,
right.
So mediocre players don't want to play with top performers. And the inverse is true also. Top performers don't want to play with mediocre performers because they don't want to be around and associate with people who don't strive for excellence, and then they don't want to have to carry the load for other people, right? It really is part of an overarching talent strategy.
Correct. It's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah. All right. That's probably a quarter of the talk track for question number 2 about setting expectations. Let's unpack question number 1. Do you reward high performance with recognition and higher pay? This feels a little Captain Obvious, right? So yeah, you should be if it's like a sales position, higher comp is maybe going to come through commissions, maybe
Correct.
accelerators. If it's a staff job, an individual contributor frontline job, maybe there aren't those kind of variables. There's still opportunities for bonuses. At minimum, there's the opportunity for recognition, right? If I look at that question, I'll take the big group and then I'll talk the smaller employers. 71% of zero growth firms said yes, 89% of fast growth. So the majority of all firms do this. And
Right.
interestingly, the number didn't change a bit for small firms. So this is one of those, I'd say, rare categories in the survey that firms under 25 employees responded literally to the exact same percentages, 71 and 89, uh, for big companies versus small companies. So it seems that everyone gets that you should do this, yet the fast growth firms do it 18% more often. What
Right.
say you?
I think this is also one of those quality things, right? So I think the small firms are saying they're reading that question, or the small, slower growth are saying, I read that question and yeah, I give raises. How do you give those raises? Or are you doing a performance evaluation? And listen, they don't have to be long. We make them customized for our clients, right? So, maybe on the manufacturing floor, you have different core values or different skills that you're evaluating than on the management team. So that has to be correct. Even if you didn't have an evaluation, Mike, what's the talk track that the manager is sitting down and talking to the person about? It's not just, hey, Mike, I gave you a 50-cent raise. That's going to be good, but study after study will tell you that recognition needs to be verbalized, and you need to tell them why they're getting that raise, right?
Yeah.
So instead of just saying you got a 50-cent raise, for that moment, Mike is going to be really excited, right? When he gets his first paycheck with that increase of pay, Mike's going to be really excited. And after that, you have lost all of the benefit of that raise unless the reason I'm giving you is a raise is I value you. You have these skills and these skills that we appreciate. Here's some examples of things I've observed that were good. Here's some areas of improvement. We're talking about performance here and driving performance. So if
Yeah.
you don't leverage that recognition to drive performance, you have completely wasted your money. You might as well throw it out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Give me maybe, so you and your team, you walk into big and small companies every day. Maybe just rattle off some of the use cases that you see, or maybe some best practices, especially the low cost to free things that you can do. But also the inverse. We don't want to call anybody out, but where do you see the mistakes being made?
So first, I'll give you an example of a mistake, and that's kind of what I was talking to. So we had a manufacturer, and I guess when they would they're very cyclical, right? They make parts for cars, actually the air conditioning system specifically. So it's very specific, and you can imagine they're busier in the summer. And that's when people take vacation, or they just tend to be, I don't know if you see it, but they're vacationing in their mind, even if they're not vacationing. So they were
Yeah.
like, we can't solve to this. I don't understand. Do I need to pay them more, Mary? Let's do a salary benchmark. No, you're paying pretty well. What's going on? So then we took a deeper dive into what was the performance, the merit increase system. What was their process? And literally, they were doing exactly what I said. They were like, "Hey, Mike, yeah, just gave you 50%. You did, thanks." That was it. So nobody knew why they were getting a raise, what they could do differently. So then we started doing evaluations. 5 questions. That was right. And it was tied to the performance we wanted to drive. Right. So you can't just say you work well with others. That's not going to help in this instance,
Yeah.
right? It might help with others. Sometimes their managers have a hard time finding an example. So we made it very specific for this production line, right? It was how many units per, day you were producing. And they had those stats. They just weren't leveraging it. Now
Mhm.
the employees went, wait a minute, you want me to work fast? Like, and I know it sounds simple, but nobody ever gave them the data that the managers had. So that's an example of the specific driving performance you want, specifically leveraging data and rewarding. So that's one example there. Now, when it comes to the free rewards, it's really not that difficult. So I'll give you another example, but I'll switch it to professional services. So we support actually an accounting firm, very successful. And, these are well paid individuals. Um, the difficult thing there is, again, they're cyclical, right? So very busy during tax season. And that takes a lot, out of the individuals. So what did they do there to recognize them? They started bringing in lunch and dinner because that's how many hours they work during tax season.
Sure.
That little piece of not having to pay for um, dinner and lunch, right? They didn't end up doing breakfast because people were coming in at staggered times.
Yeah.
But paying for the meals, number one, made everybody really happy, and that did cost some money, but they got it back in productivity because nobody left the building.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right? Going out to have lunch and dinner, or even ordering it in, you're waiting, you're standing at the door, you're paying the, Uber Eats person. It drove their productivity, but people were happier. They were like, you recognize how hard I'm working and you're rewarding us for it.
Yeah. Right. I love that. I love that. I think about different job types also. Like there are some job types it's like you kind of need to schedule the break. Maybe
Yes,
it's a physically demanding job, maybe it's a mentally taxing job, but it's kind of
so
maybe
true.
monotonous. So maybe my body needs a rest. Maybe I just need to take a break from the phones because I'm hitting it hard and I need to take that break. But there's other jobs where engineering, for example, that the productivity loss from interruptions in stopping work. There's you don't just pick up after lunch and all of a sudden you're right back where you left off. There's like a long ramp time
Yeah.
before your brain is back engaged where it was. I think things like that could just go a long, long ways, especially for certain job types.
Right, right. It's very true. And then the free things that you can do is, you would get we do lunch and learns, right? So we've done it. I've done, disc training just to make it fun. You can have a nutritionist come in. They'll come in for free a lot of times because they're hoping to get some business.
Yeah,
Financial analysts, financial planners will come in and, just do a basic, money 101. A bank will come in 100% of the time. I usually, will have a full list, now that we're virtual, the list of lunch and learn, people that I have in my network can help any of my clients. So
yeah,
those are the kinds of things. And the other thing you can do is survey your staff. What types of speakers would you like for a lunch and learn?
yeah,
So we utilize the survey tool that we use to ask the employees. So you're not bringing somebody in and nobody comes in to listen to them.
yeah. Right, right.
Yeah. It's
Let's
easy.
move to our. You know what? Before we move on, I want your thoughts on the pay. Um, face value, it sounds like obvious. Oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
we higher pay, maybe with bonus incentives, commissions, whatever, to our highest performers. What are the areas of opportunity, shall we call it, the mistakes that you see folks making? Because when you engage pretty frequently, you're doing salary benchmarking across the job families to see how they're doing.
Right.
Is this an area you think most companies do a good job of, or where are the landmines here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's usually in organizations, one of your biggest costs is your salaries.
Yeah,
So companies, I think sometimes, keep those salaries too low. You're not going to attract the best talent and you're not going to retain. Now, when we like to do a salary benchmark, it's just that much. It's a benchmark, right? So that's one piece of compensation. It's not everything. So some organizations pay a ton and they're like, why can't I keep people? I pay so much money. And we've talked about the reasons that they don't retain them, and that goes long and deep, right? So salary can't be the only reward that you're giving individuals for their performance. I interview people quite often. And anybody who interviews people don't leave solely because of money. The money cannot be there, and other factors are, like, how am I empowered? How am I treated? You know, what are the extra things, right? Do I get a 401k? Things like that. So salary can't be the only thing, but you definitely have to meet that minimum. You should be at the benchmark. My nonprofits sometimes aren't. So we try to fill in with some of the free benefits.
yeah. I think sometimes folks see a benchmark and they see, oh, this is what the marketplace is paying. Oh, that's just what I have to pay. I think you can be much more intentional about your strategies here. Um, you
Agreed.
can make a really strong case for paying significantly under market value if you have other parts of your value prop. It could be your benefits, it could be the flexibility. It might be that your mission is so gosh darn good that people are willing to commute an hour and a half to you and work insane hours because they believe in your mission to colonize Mars, right? I mean,
Right.
it's and obviously a SpaceX reference. But when
Right.
people are so bought into your mission,
Right.
then it's not like you want to intentionally take advantage of people, but there is trade-offs, right? And so some people
Oh,
will trade
yeah.
money for time and flexibility,
Well,
virtual
that's,
versus in office. The inverse is
that's
also go ahead.
right. No, that's the nonprofits, right? People are, I
Right.
want to save people. I want to help the underserved. So, it's both sides, right? You're a leader in your industry and you better leverage that culture and,
Yeah.
the mission. It's all of them, and leverage them.
One of my sisters is an executive in the Red Cross. She's ridiculously talented. She could go make more money other places. She's bought into the mission of helping people, and she loves
Isn't that great?
how her work impacts lives. And I was going to say the inverse is also true, where you can pay way above market value and have really good ROI if if it comes with the insistence that you're raising the bar on expectations of performance,
I
right?
agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. And
Yep.
when you think when you and you and it's as simple as dividing revenue by your salary expense,
Yep.
your right, and that'll tell you your productivity levels.
Yep.
And one or two really, 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 really talented engineers can outperform a team of 10 junior engineers, right? Because it's
Very
not how
true.
many lines of code you need, it's how good it's almost how few lines of code do you really need. The really, really smart engineer figures out better ways to do things, right?
Agreed.
All right, let's move to our next one. Do you regularly communicate expectations for job performance? I feel like maybe this is, well, I'll rattle off the numbers. These are lower, but they're all still high. And I'll focus here maybe on the smaller firms under 25 employees. The gap is a little bit bigger.
Yep.
64% of zero growth firms said yes. 85% of fast growth said yes. So it's still the majority. It's 64% of even the zero growth say they do it.
Yep.
Um, I almost think I think people underthink this one. I feel super guilty even talking about this subject because I think I do a terrible job setting the expectations. My team members might feel disappointed how I feel about the results. It's like, well, damn, did I even set the proper expectations in the first place?
Yeah.
Man, I think expectations are kind of everything, aren't they?
Yes. I agree. And how are you setting those expectations? Are you reminding people? This comes up a lot when we're doing warning notices. And they're like, well, they should know. And I go, well, how would they know? And they're like, well, 5 years ago, I gave them a job description. And I'm like, really? Um, so job expectations need to be refreshed,
Yeah.
right? We look at job descriptions or recommend every single year. Not that you're going to change it every year, Mike. I'm not saying that, but are we reviewing those job expectations in an evaluation? Or, as we discussed, a stay interview may have something to do with that. You may bring in that job description,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right. Um, what do you think the best practices are? We almost don't even need to talk about what are the mistakes, because I think the mistakes are people just simply don't do it. I think,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So are there some ways that are better than others and some best practices for setting expectations?
I mean, I think, we have a saying in HR, if it's not written down, it's not real. So unless you're giving a document like a job description, right? And it could be different than a job description in that I'd want you to give a job description, but maybe for the manufacturing floor, we actually give them something specific that says, this is how many units I'd like you to produce per hour, per day, per week, however you want to state it, right?
Yeah.
For professional services, right? This is your job description, but your job expectations are can and should be some additional things. Like, I expect you to do some networking, right? If you talk about professional services, I think most firms are going to want you to do some type of getting out there and listening to the trends going on in the outside world, right?
Mhm.
What are you doing to drive business and what does that look like? So those things need to be discussed with individuals. And I think that is something that also makes you work as a team, because then those things are tied to your goals in the organization. And instead of being a worker, now they're, part of the entire machine, that entire organization, driving to the goals. And those goals don't
Yeah.
have to be dollars and cents, because in your nonprofits, it's not dollars and cents unless you're in fundraising side of it. It's how many lives are we helping, right? So I think that performance um, and job expectations, there's a lot of different areas that need to be reviewed with the employees. They're not going to get it through osmosis. Don't make them guess.
Yeah. Do you see, curious your thoughts, sometimes I feel like companies try to highlight too many things. We've gotten so good at automation and KPIs and dashboards. I mean, I got I got a ridiculous amount of detail. If I tried to read off all the details on my dashboards, you'd be numb
I
within 10
agree.
minutes probably.
I
Um,
agree.
do you see that as an issue where folks are trying to set expectations on too many things versus just here's what's core and essential?
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. KISS comes to mind, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Um, just because if you use a shotgun approach, you don't know, they're not going to be able to focus on all of it. And they may focus on the one thing that's the weakest there. So, keep it narrow and keep it, connected to your goals, and make sure you're including the why. Why do we want you to do that? Here's the reason.
Right. I've shared that with you before. I mean, I used to coach youth football when my boys were young,
Yeah.
uh, and I mean, I freaking loved it, and I loved the intensity and getting them all fired up, and
Right. Right.
that was the fun part. But my effectiveness as a coach changed dramatically when I actually calmed things down and explained why. So it's not just that you want to step forward with your left foot, your head tucked in against the side of their body, and you're pushing with your right shoulder on that block. But when you explain why they do that, then okay, the light bulb clicks. And
Right. Right.
it applies to youth football, and it applies to every job out there, right?
Right. I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Next one. Do you have a formal performance review process? Smaller companies, 29% gap between zero growth and fast growth. 51%, so call it half of
Yeah.
zero growth firms say that they have a formal performance review process. Maybe challenge that. 80% of fast growth firms do.
Yeah.
This one might be another one where you suggested, as we were talking, before we started rolling today, we mentioned this many times. This is a quantitative survey, not a qualitative survey. So we're just asking, do you do it? Yes or no. That gives us the ability to correlate responses to revenue growth. But this is one that probably really matters. How the quality probably matters a lot in your review process, right?
Right. And that's why this is one of the core trainings that we do for clients, right? So no matter how many times a manager has done performance evaluations, I do feel like they need the reminder. Look, as a manager, it's very difficult to give, critical feedback. But if you don't, performance will not change. If you don't tell me I'm not doing the exact job that you want, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Right. And
Yeah.
the other issue is the performance evaluation is often tied to their merit increase. So the manager says to themselves, I don't want to lose this individual retention. So I'm going to make sure they get the top raise. So I'm going to just evaluate them the best, higher than they really should get. And then I get to keep the person and I get to give them a big raise. I avoid a difficult conversation. In essence, what you have done is you've taken wherever the level of that performance is, it's going to stay the same or go down. Why would that individual change? I got a good raise and my manager said I was doing well, right? There was no critical feedback. And even your top performers need critical feedback. I will say that your top performers will beg for feedback. They want to move ahead. They want to be stronger and they want to be better at their job. So if you don't give them critical feedback, you're not managing them.
Yeah.
You're not helping them get to the next level. And it could be outside of the realm of the position, right? If you want to move to the next position, here's some extra things that I'd like you to do, right? So that critical feedback could just be giving them a project or some extra responsibility, but they need it.
Mary, I feel like I see some managers afraid to give critical feedback to top performers because they don't want to discourage their top performers. It's like, hey, I just want to praise them. I'd be dead in the water if I lost them.
Right.
Do you see that? And maybe what have some coaching for? It's dangerous to only give one or the other. You got to give both.
Right.
But what's your guidance here?
So, I think when we give that critical feedback to our top performers, you might say to yourself, I'm looking at that overall performance and they're stellar. But there's always something that you can say, Mike, continue to do your networking. Maybe we should look at some of the groups that you're in and evaluate which ones are successful and which ones you're going to and you're really not getting, the referral business that you need, right? So the critical feedback doesn't need to be, Mike, you're doing really great. But in this area, it's all in the way that you say. And again, your top performers are top performers because they're driven. And a driven individual wants to hear feedback. It's not necessarily negative feedback. It's feedback. It's critical to their job and how they can go further.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. Critical meaning it's criticality, not critical meaning you're bad, right?
Right. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think that's I think people think that when they hear some
Yeah.
critical feedback, I don't want to give critical feedback. I only want to encourage people. Well, it's the
Yes.
criticality of the feedback, right?
Yes. Correct.
It, and
Important.
and I probably overuse sports metaphors, but um, I mean, when Andy Reid's on the sideline coaching the Kansas City Chiefs, Andy Reid's not a better quarterback than Mahomes, right? I mean, but Andy Reid for sure critiques every single play, breaks down film, and literally looks at every single step and every single option and gives critical feedback to someone
Right.
who is better at that job than he is. That's okay to do.
Yes.
It'd be silly not to create an environment of enthusiasm and also celebrating the wins and whatnot. Uh, but you're robbing that person's ability to get better if you don't share with them that feedback.
Right. Exactly. Then even if they're a high performer, that water level's going to stay here. Don't you want it to keep rising?
Yeah. Let's move to the next one. And I know you and I, we've talked offline about this one enough to we have some opinions here. But here's the question. Do you ever conduct 360 reviews with feedback from multiple team members? It's a 43% spread for under 25 employee firms, 39% spread for companies of all sizes. So I think this is in the top 2 or 3 most impactful questions. We know that most firms really don't do this. So I see zero growth firms under 25 employees, 22% said yes. 22 is probably still high. 65% of fast growth. I suspect even that's high.
Yeah.
Read between the lines of that question. What do you think people are really saying here? Obviously, it's a big impact. We'll talk about why it's a big impact. But how do you
Yeah.
think folks read the question and responded the way they did?
Well, I think it is a little bit difficult to do 360s if you want them to be anonymous in a smaller organization. So if I'm a manager of 2 people and you do a 360, and to be honest with you, they're usually done anonymously. I only have 2 people on my team. So the 2 people on my team are like, well, I can't really give honest feedback on Mary. She's going to know it's me or Joe. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
less likely to give, I think, a truthful answer on
Yeah.
what I think their performance is. And it's the same for my coworker. It's a small organization. Joe's my only coworker. So if a 360 is done, I know it's Joe doing it on me and he knows it's me. So it is a little difficult to do it, in a smaller organization if you want to keep, the responses anonymous. And personally, um, I think that's the way to do it because people give more honest feedback. The other thing is a 360 is not a regular evaluation. The questions need to be nuanced. They need to be specific. It's different if you're doing a 360 on a coworker than a manager.
Yeah.
So they do, you probably should invest some money in a 360, and have, an expert help you launch it so that it's done correctly. So
Yeah.
I think, that is a little bit more difficult for a smaller employer. I also think it's just not as well known. Like I think some people don't know what a 360 is.
Right. My interpretation is that people understand the concept. Okay, 360-degree view. We're going to have other people give feedback. I assume that they mean they get feedback from others. It's probably something a little more generic than
Right.
this. We're not following the HR religion of this is the way a 360 is conducted. Period. I think
Right.
it's probably a little looser interpretation, but nonetheless, I would assume high performing companies, the fast growth, either interpreted or misinterpreted the question to the same degree that the low performers, the zero growth firms did. And it's still a massive spread of 43%.
Yeah.
What is so powerful about 360 reviews, or at least the concept of getting feedback from not just your boss or your employees, but your peers and others in the organization you work with?
I I think the importance is that we sometimes ignore the value of having good internal customer service, right? So I can't do anything all by myself. You can't do anything all by yourself. We have to work with the others within the organization for for me to be successful and for the entire organization to be successful.
Yeah.
So understanding how I'm working in this, cog of the wheel is very important, and it's important to the organization. So again, I'll go back to let's use the top performer because I think it helps illustrate this point. I can have a top performer, and I can, think of top performers at a client, right? And they're like, they're really successful, but nobody wants to work with them, right? It happens all the time, Mike. You know this,
Yeah.
right? And I think everybody listening will be like, yeah, that top. Why don't people want to work? And then how we need that feedback so that we can then go to that individual and say, I'm going to make you even more, help you be even more successful.
Yes.
Here's some feedback. Let me coach you on it, counsel you on it, and help you move from that, nobody wants to work with you.
Yeah.
You wouldn't quite that way. And to a more collaborative, communication and work environment. So it's very important because it's the whole organization and how everybody's working together. You can't go anywhere with one or two high performers. You need everybody to work well together to the
Well, and I
extent you
think
can.
one of the things I like about a 360 is it's easy for any of us to kind of fall into our positive or negative, but I think more commonly a positive feedback loop that we might think we're doing a great job because this person says I'm great. This person says I'm great. These people are thanking me constantly. How could you possibly be disappointed in my performance? Right.
Yeah,
And sometimes we're just perceived differently the way we engage with different parts of the organization. If you're a manager, your employees might see you different than your peers in other departments, might see you different than your direct supervisor, might see you differently than other senior leadership. Everyone's going to have a different vantage point,
yeah,
and you can't grow unless you really see all that. So,
agreed.
anything else on 360 reviews?
I mean, I think they're fabulous. Obviously being an HR nerd, I think they're really powerful. So I think I'd recommend that if you haven't used them to go ahead and try them and you know, see if it helps.
I will say, I think some of my biggest growth as a manager, as a leader in my entire career has come out of 360s, and it's been when the feedback really stung.
Yeah.
And it's really stung from people that I really liked and respected. And it wasn't even, hey, you suck at this thing. It's, hey, when I see this behavior, this is what it looks like it means to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
I
mean that.
that's not at all how I meant that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's what I'm putting out in the universe because this person said it, this person said it, and this person said it. It's like that is not
I
my
can't
intent.
deny it.
Yeah, there's only one common denominator in this problem. It's me, right?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, I think they're hugely impactful. I'm a
I
fan.
agree.
Last one. So I think everyone we've had a focus on high performance so far. This one goes the other way. Do you document performance improvement plans for underperforming employees? Um, Only a 13% spread for larger firms. This seems to be an area that as companies get bigger, okay, this is a standard practice, right? So 63% said yes versus 76% yes. It's a 13% spread. It's meaningful. Fast growth firms do it more often across. But if I look at the smaller firms under 25 employees, again, we know that the smaller firms, they're more strapped with time and resources meaning money and just skills and all kinds of things make up
Yeah.
resources, right? But it's 49% of zero growth firms said yes. So call it half. 80% of fast growth firms said yes. So it's a 31 percentage point spread, a correlation to revenue growth, whether they do or don't have document performance improvement plans for underperforming employees.
Yeah.
What what's so magical about the document, Mary?
Yeah. Well, like I said before,
Yeah.
if it's not written down, it's not real. Um, and, you want to make sure that the employee, that they have it in writing, they can review it at another time. When you're giving, negative feedback, sometimes they don't really hear everything that you said because they're upset, right? They might get defensive and not even, talk over you, etc. So this way it's in writing. Now, obviously the compliance side of me wants it in writing so that if we do go to termination, we have a defense in court that we did give them, the fair warning. But if we all, and the other piece is, of course, consistency, if we're always writing people up.
Yeah.
But warning notice, is for those, probably more of your non-exempt employees. The performance improvement plan then would be for an executive level individual that's not meeting standards. And that is going to be a longer document. And I'm going to use the job description to drive that performance improvement plan. And because it's a longer document, it needs to be a document, right? If I tell somebody, an attorney at one of the law firms we support, you're not doing a great job, you need to do better, here's your warning, sign it, doesn't really mean much because it's a complex job. So what area needs improvement? How do I improve? Are we meeting on it and talking about it? So again, having it in writing, I think, is important on the compliance side, but it's also in fairness to the employee who's getting the warning or a performance improvement plan. They have something to go back to look at, to read so that they can understand it. They can ask questions about it. So, for those reasons, it needs to be in writing.
Yeah. Again, I feel I have moments of guilt pop up in these conversations because I talk a lot about HR best practices, and
Yeah.
I know them here, but do I live them out here and then my day to day, and not as much as I want. And I'm reminded of scenarios where I really thought this employee knew that they were underperforming in these areas. They were missing expectations until it came time to put them on a documented plan, and they were shocked. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, clearly it's my miss, not theirs.
Yeah.
I should say clearly. I think there's sometimes the reason they're underperforming is because they don't pick up on social cues from anybody. But
Right.
no, maybe that's not always you. But clearly I missed the boat.
Or
Did
management. Yeah.
right? I feel like having a documented performance process that might certainly it includes setting expectations. So we talked about the other questions: communicating expectations, having a performance review process that includes performance improvement plans, a PIP, if you will. That following those processes forces you as a manager to have better conversations further upstream. Because if I'm a manager and I know, gosh darn well, that my boss is not going to let me terminate this person who's clearly underperforming and has been for a long time, but I'm
Right.
not going to be allowed to do it unless I have a performance plan in place. I'm going to be having the right kinds of conversation further upstream so that isn't a shock. So I
Agreed.
almost think it's not the document itself. It's what it does, the bar you're setting as a company, and the expectation you're setting on your managers and your leaders for how they set expectations with employees further upstream, because that then just becomes a natural consequence of the process.
I agree. And, we talked about, really good performers don't want to work with mediocre performers. And most employees know the level of productivity of their coworkers. And I don't care if that's manufacturing, where you can really see how many widgets they made, or whether it's, the law firm that I talked about and they see, how many cases they're trying or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
They know, right? They know who comes in early, who works late, etc. Right. So when you don't hold everybody to the same standard, And, you know, you don't publicize that you put somebody on a warning notice, but somehow it gets out there, right? Mike, we all
Yep.
know this,
Yep.
that it it is better for everybody's performance, because there is nothing more frustrating to a good high performer when they go, I come in, I work really hard, I am very successful, and Mike doesn't, and they do nothing about it,
Yeah.
right? When
Yeah.
they see Mike going into the manager's office, they might not know it's a warning, but they know Mike is being guided, right? And I'm telling you, it does a lot for morale where you would think it was the opposite. It is not. Everybody wants to know that they're all held to the same standard. And look, I think we have to get away from the idea that when somebody's on a warning notice or a PIP, they're going to be terminated. Like it's a foregone conclusion. It is not. I've
Yeah.
been doing this a really long time. That's not the attitude that we should have. We should be setting those strong expectations with a warning notice or a PIP to rehabilitate, guide, coach, counsel that individual so that they meet or exceed the standards of the job.
Couldn't possibly agree
Not just
more.
improve.
I couldn't possibly agree more. I certainly I won't dox the person, but long time ago, I took over a new job and I had a young VP reporting to me that I thought was super high potential. Really loved this person. Did a lot of really great things, but was missing the mark pretty bad in just a couple very specific areas. And first 30, 60 days in the job, I put them on a performance plan. They were shocked. They'd never imagined. Um, they crushed it. That person is an SVP at a big company today because they're awesome. They were awesome then, and they shored up a couple things that were shortcomings, and they're awesome now. And they've had a fantastic career. So
Yeah,
this is not a if you're seeing this as this is the step before firing someone so I don't get sued, then shame on you. I mean,
yeah.
maybe there's a
You're
little
missing
bit
the
of
mark.
a truth around some liability and some protection because you can prove that you set expectations, but that probably falls in the risk mitigation category. And we didn't put that in the survey, risk
Yeah,
mitigation. We put performance. And so if you're going to raise performance, that's how you got to use the tool.
agreed.
All right, Mary, that's all the questions. Maybe I'll give it to you to close, put a bow on this, and I'd maybe encourage you to go back to where we were at the top here. The number one of the 8 categories, the one that had the highest correlation to revenue growth, with a spread between zero growth firms and fast growth firms of 32%, was retention. The next is development, 30% spread, and now performance with a 22% spread. Why is performance so important, and how does it correlate to the other two?
And I think I'll repeat what I started with is honestly, this is how we drive the success of the organization, right? It's not enough to just hire our employees. We have to make sure that um, the performance is driving to the goals, that the expectations are set, that they understand the skills that they need. And we're doing this all the time, right? And a lot of this comes from the managers. So I would just remind everybody that management training is paramount every year, multiple times a year, to just remind them. You could have stellar managers. You and I have managed people for many years. I still, do a management training class and read a management book. And I know you do on a consistent basis. We all need reminders. We all need help to manage performance to drive the ROI.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll kind of recap my big takeaway from this session is performance correlates to growth for very obvious reasons. You hold a high standard of expectation for your best and your lowest performers. And the entire organization naturally will perform higher when you do that.
Agreed.
But talent wins. You know,
Yes.
if I'm the if in my sports analogy, I may be the greatest basketball coach of all time, But if all my players are 5'2", I'm not going to beat a team with a bunch of 6'6", 7-footers
Yeah.
who are better than me. I'm just not, no matter how good of a coach I am. And so performance really matters.
Agreed.
But whose performance are you managing? Are you managing mediocre players, or are you managing really talented players? And how you get really talented players starts at the top, from recruiting. You got to have great benefits to recruit the right kind of people. You got to onboard them properly. Development, you got to stay compliant, of course, through all this. And then what are you doing to retain that talent? It's like that all precedes, it's all further upstream from managing the talent through performance.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
Yep.
All right, Mara. Love our conversations as always. Thanks for joining me today.
It was great. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody else. And thank you for letting us be part of your mission to grow.
That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrowth.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit assuresoftware.com. Until next time.